خير الخلق قدوتنا تعال وزر وشاركنا وقم بالخير سابقنا لقانا في ابن تيمية وخير الخلق قدوتنا لقانا في ابن تيمية وخير الخلق قدوتنا لقانا في ابن تيمية وخير الخلق قدوتنا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد خاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. Last week we took the author's statement من الحدث إلى مثله, and we mentioned when the actual timing of the 3 days and 3 nights for a traveler, the 1 day and 1 night for a resident actually begin. Then we mentioned when they actually end, and we took the mas'ala of whether one's wudū invalidates at the expiration of the 24-hour or 72-hour period. And then we mentioned whether taking off the khuff also invalidates the wudū. We mentioned whether the taking off of the khuff invalidates the wudū. Then we reached the statement على ساتر ثابت بنفسه. We said that satir, we stopped off at على ساتر. We said على ساتر means that it's covered, and that satir is a broad term, and it could encompass one of 3 meanings. And the author could mean all 3 of them, or 2 of them, or 1 of them. And one of them, the first one that we took, is covering the feet up to the ankles, covering the feet with no holes in socks or khuffs, and covering the feet in that it's not see-through or thin. And we took the first one. The first one is covering the feet up to the ankles. The second one, which we'll begin on today inshallah, is satir, as in covering the feet with no holes. The mas'ala is, can one wipe on ripped or torn or worn out khuffs or socks? The first opinion is that you can't wipe on a khuff or a sock that has any rip in it. This is the opinion of Imam al-Shafi'i and one of the opinions of Imam Ahmad rahimahumullah. Some of the ulama have a rule that doubts and exceptions means you go back to the origin. This is an exception, wiping over the khuff. So you go back to the origin. They said this is a matter of doubt, so we go back to the origin of washing the feet and not wiping over a khuff or a sock that has hole in it. They also use the rationale that they used when we spoke about low-cut socks and khuffs last week, if you remember. They said that there's an uncovered, bare part of the foot that one must wash, where you see the flesh through the holes. And the rest of the foot is covered by a khuff. The flesh, where you see the flesh, it's got to be washed. The part where the khuff is, you got to wipe it. They said the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam never combined between wiping and washing a limb, so you can't wipe over torn socks or khuffs. The second opinion, that's the opinion of the Hanafiya and Malikiya. They said if the holes in the khuff are minor, then it's permissible to wipe over them. They said minor cuts or holes are pardoned because it's rare and exceptional for khuffs or socks not to have them. The third opinion is the opinion, old opinion of a Shafi'i, and it's the opinion of a Zahiriyya, and many ulama chose it, like Ibn al-Mundhir and Sufyan ibn Uyayna and Ishaq ibn Rahawayh and Ibn al-Mubarak and others. They said that you can wipe on a torn or ripped khuff or a sock unconditionally. The difference between the second and third opinion is that the second opinion said only if they're minor, while the third opinion did not put any conditions or restrictions. And the third opinion would be Ar-Rājih, and let me tell you why. First of all, the purpose of legislating and wiping over the khuff is to remove the hardship in taking them off. And with that purpose in mind, both a ripped and a new khuff are equal. Ripped or intact socks need to be taken off and put back on the same way. It's difficult for a person wearing a new khuff or socks to take it off like it is for one who has holes in them. Meaning both a person with a ripped and intact khuff, take them off and put them on the same way. Number two, the permissibility and the entire concept of the ibadah of wiping over the khuff is to make matters pertaining to wudu easier. And they said you shouldn't add restrictions with no solid proof that go against the entire concept on why wiping over the khuff was legislated, which is to make matters easier. Third of all, in Musannaf Abd al-Razzaq, there's a statement by Sufyan al-Thawri that he said, was it the khifaf of the Muhajirin and Ansar but cut and ripped and stitched up? وهل كانت خفاف المهاجرين والأنصار إلا مخرقة مشققة مرقعة? And Ibn Hazm said a similar statement. He said, most of the Sahaba from the Muhajirin and Ansar, they were poor, and their khuffs would most likely have cuts and holes in somewhere in them. A fourth point, we were permitted to wipe over the khuff by the hadith. And those ahadith did not restrict it with being free from holes. And this, I believe, is sufficient by itself and the strongest proof. The fifth point backs up the fourth point, in that the Messenger ﷺ knew that khuffs get ripped and torn. Yet he didn't make any type of exception on this matter. He didn't say whether they were ripped or not, or whether the ripping was small or big. If it mattered, he wouldn't leave us without guidance, nor would he even delay it, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The sixth point, some ulama who adopted this also said a ripped and torn khuff is still referred to as a khuff, so long as you can normally walk on it, with it. So the hadith stating that one can wipe over a khuff or socks applies to them. And there's no proof to add an exception pertaining to holes in them. We took satir as in covering up to the ankles. We took satir as in covers with no holes. And the final possibility of the meaning of the word satir is that it covers the foot and it's thick, meaning it's not thin or see-through. This is our mas'ala. Can one wipe over thin socks or khuffs if they exist, like sheer socks or transparent socks or nylons or something similar to that? The first opinion is the opinion of the overwhelming majority of the ulama, and they said they have to be thick. And this is the opinion of Abu Hanifa, or possibly an older opinion of his. It's the opinion of Shafi'iyya, the Hanabila. Al-Hasan al-Basri chose it, Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib chose it. They said if it's not thick, you can't continuously walk on it, then you can't wipe on it. They also said thin, see-through socks are not satir. They're not covering in reality. They're not in reality covering the foot, so they take the ruling that it's bare. The second opinion is that it's permissible to wipe over thin socks even if they're see-through. And Nawawi in Al-Majmu' attributed this opinion to Umar and Ali radiallahu anhum. And among the ulama who accepted this opinion is Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, the famous two students of Abu Hanifa. Dawood al-Zahiri also chose it, and Ishaq ibn Rahway also chose it. And notice, Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala was with the first opinion we said. His famous two students were with the second opinion. And that's been related in Bada'i al-Sana'a. And it's also related that Abu Hanifa recanted in Bada'i al-Sana'a, they recanted and went by what his famous two students adopted towards the end of his life. That's why I said it might be an earlier opinion of Abu Hanifa. Bada'i al-Sana'a is a book that is a simply worded book on the Hanafi madhab. The author is Ala ad-Din al-Kasani, who died maybe around 580 years after the Hijrah. Badai' al-Sana' is an elucidation of his Shaykh's book, Ala ad-Din al-Samarqandi, his book Tuhfat al-Fuqaha. It's also, of course, in the Hanafi madhab. His Shaykh's book Tuhfat al-Fuqaha is also an elucidation of another formal book called Mukhtasar Turi. Badai' al-Sana' fi Tartib al-Shara' is an elucidation of an elucidation. The author, Ala ad-Din al-Kasani, the author of Badai' al-Sana', he showed his book to his Shaykh, Ala ad-Din al-Samarqandi, since it was his Shaykh's book that he was working on. And the Shaykh liked it so much that he offered him his daughter in marriage. He married her, and the dowry was this book. They used to say, شَرَحَ تُحْفَتَهُ فَزَوَّجَهُ ابْنَتَهُ. In Badai' al-Sana', he stated that Abu Hanifa recanted and went back to what his two students had adopted, permitting wiping over thin socks. But then if you dig deeper into the Hanafi books, you'll find that Abu Sulaiman al-Jawzajani, who's a student of Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, he stated that socks can't be thin, and he attributed that to his teachers. So there's going back and forth on this issue within the madhab. So that leads us to what's important to know, which is what is Ar-Rājih and why. We don't just randomly choose Ar-Rājih. Ar-Rājih is the second opinion, that it's permissible to wipe over thin socks even if they're see-through, even if they're thin. The purpose of legislating wiping over the Khuff in socks is to make matters easier, as to not take off the socks or Khuff in Wudū. And this illah, this reasoning is the same in a Khuff, in a sock, in socks that are light or thick. Also, thin socks or Khuffs are referred to as Khuffs or socks, meaning the term applies to them even if they're thin. So the ruling applies to them as well. Number 3, what came as general should remain as general and cannot be restricted without proof. ما ورد من الأدلة مطلقة فلا بد أن يبقى على إطلاقه ولا يقيد إلا بدليل. Proof for wiping over the Khuff is general, and it should remain so. And it doesn't specify thick or thin. Basically saying they must be thick is requesting something in ibadah that needs proof that they don't have. The proof for wiping over the Khuff are general, and they should remain so unless you bring solid proof against that. Some who were against wiping over thin Khuff said, as we stated with their rationales, that the thin clothes are not sufficient to cover awrah by ijma'. So it shouldn't be sufficient for covering the foot. It's not satir. So they said that it takes the ruling that it's bare. The response is that they don't fall under the ruling and restrictions that pertain to covering the awrah. They're two different things. And that concludes the statement, على ساتر ثابت بنفسه. The next statement by the author, على ساتر. We didn't take ثابت بنفسه yet. The next statement is ثابت بنفسه, firm, stable by itself, meaning you wear the Khuff or socks by themselves without having to wrap anything around them to keep them on. And there's opinions on this matter. The first opinion is that the former dhahab said they must be firm and stable by themselves in order to be allowed to wipe on them. You can't wipe over Khuff or socks that keep dropping down or that are tied with something external like a cloth or a rope or a tie. They said the need to wipe is for a Khuff that is firm around the foot and that one can continue to walk with. They said it's not difficult to take off a Khuff or socks that keep dropping down. So the reason for the exception of wiping over the Khuff is not needed for that person whose Khuff or socks are not ثابت بنفسه. Just like it keeps dropping down, you can easily take it off and wash your feet. The exemption is not needed. The second opinion is the opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah, and it's the second opinion of a Shafi'iyya, and some Malikiyya chose it, and they said that the Khuff doesn't have to be stable and firm on its own. Why? simply put, that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed wiping over the khuff, and he did not restrict it by saying it must be robust or fixed or stable in itself on its own. Also, another rationale they gave is that the khuff is good and valid. It's good in itself. So you can't deprive someone of wiping on it. What they mean is that the khuff that you say keeps falling or sliding down, if a man with a larger foot or thicker foot wore it, it would hold up on its own. So there's nothing wrong with that khuff or socks. Therefore, you can't deprive someone of using that normal khuff or socks. They also said, the previous opinion said that you must walk on it without falling off. And the answer is, what if someone paralyzed is wearing it? They're depriving someone of wiping over the socks or khuff without proof. They also said, what's not fixed on its own is included in the permissibility by analogy. What's fixed by being tied with something follows in ruling what's fixed on its own by analogy, by qiyas. Also, khuff or socks are referred to as khuff or socks, whether it's firm on its own or tied with something else. And that concludes the author's issues on the khuffs, and that's his statements on that. However, there's some issues that he didn't mention that we need to mention. And one of them is, can you wipe on shoes? The four imams don't permit wiping over the shoes. Al-Mawardi alleged there was an ijma that it's not permissible to wipe over the shoes. Imam al-Shanqiti in Adwa al-Bayan said one wiping on his shoes is in reality not washing the foot, nor is he wiping over what covers the foot, like socks. So he didn't allow it. Ibn al-Qayyim said the hadith that the opinion permitted it uses are abrogated by the ruling of washing the feet. The minority opinion, the second opinion, is that it's permissible to wipe over the shoes. Ibn Taymiyyah said it's permissible if it's difficult to take them off. There's many hadith that specify that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam wiped over his shoes. Na'layn. The term is an-na'layn. Each of those hadith has weakness in its chain. In fact, it's accurate to say there's no authentic narration that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam wiped over his shoes. So Ibn al-Qayyim's statement earlier that these hadith are abrogated to refute this opinion that we say is Ar-Rājih, are not needed, because we're already saying they're weak and we're not going to use them. There's also a narration related by Al-Bazzar that Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma made wudu wiping over his shoes, and then he said this is how the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to do it. However, the strongest proof that would make it permissible to wipe over shoes is an authentic narration in Musannaf ibn Abi Shaybah that Ali radiallahu anhu wiped over his shoes. That narration of Ali is strong enough to stand on its own, and its proof on this matter, combined with the fact that we don't know that any of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'een objected or opposed him. The next mas'ala is, can you wipe on socks for wudu? And before we get into that, we have to understand the fiqh definition of socks. It's anything that's like a khuff made from other than leather. And Hattab al-Maliki said it's what's like a khuff made from cotton or any other material. So the difference between a khuff and socks, which is called al-jawrab, is that al-jawrab is made of cotton, wool, nylon, or any other material. There's two opinions on this matter. The first opinion is one of two opinions of Shafi'i, and it's their official madhab, and the madhab of the Hanabila, and the opinion of the two students of Abu Hanifa, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad al-Hanafiya. And Al-Zahiriyya chose this opinion, and it appears to be the final opinion of Abu Hanifa himself, because As-Sarkhasi in his book Al-Mabsut said that Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala in his illness wiped over his socks. And he said, I'm doing what I used to deter people from doing. And they inferred from that he agreed with the opinion of his students after all. And we mentioned earlier, when we were talking about thin and thick socks, we mentioned that in the dowry book, Bada'i al-Sana'a, that there's statements that support that Abu Hanifa rahimahullah permitted wiping over socks, and there's similar statements in Tabyin al-Haqa'iq, Sharh Kanz al-Daqa'iq lil-Zayla'i that support that matter. The second opinion is that it's not permissible to wipe on socks, or they placed some restrictions on it. And Ibn Rushd said this is the opinion of a Shafi'iyya, some of the Malikiyya, and Abu Hanifa. And of course, Abu Hanifa, we mentioned earlier that he most likely recanted. Some under this opinion placed restrictions that only if you can walk with them a certain distance. Some, like some of the Malikiyya, they said they need to have a leather bottom. And the proof that they alleged is that one must wash his feet by a clear command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. You can't differ from that to anything else except through clear, authentic proof. They said wiping over the socks, the hadith on it, are weak among the muhaddithin. And the response is, if they're talking about the hadith about the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yes, but there's some authentic narrations by the Sahaba. Also, Sahaba who authentically wipe over the socks would never leave the command of the Quran and disobey the Quran by wiping over the socks had it not been permitted. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala said they heard the Quran from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they learned it and they wiped over the socks, and they are the most knowledgeable in the Quran and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. They said if socks don't at least have under it some leather, then and you can't continue walking with it, you can't use it. There's no proof to state that you need to continuously walk in them or that they have to have leather in them. All that has no effect. The bottom line is taking off the khuff is as difficult as taking off the socks, so the need is the same. The Rājih is the permissibility to wipe over socks, and the reasons are, there's some ahadith on this, but like the second opinion correctly stated, they're weak. And like we said about the previous mas'ala on the shoes, what did I say there? I said that there's some ahadith that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam wiped over the shoes, specifying the shoes. Those ahadith specifying that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam wiped on the na'al, those shoes are weak. And likewise, hair, that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam wiped on socks during wudu, these ahadith here are weak as well. The summary is, there's no authentic hadith specifying that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam wiped on shoes, and nothing authentic they wiped on socks. Number two, there's numerous narrations that the Sahaba wiped on socks or permitted it, reaching to a total of nearly 13 Sahaba. Some are not authentic, but others are. Ibn al-Mundhir mentioned 9 Sahaba by name. And Ibn al-Qayyim said Abu Dawood added 4 more. Ali ibn Abi Talib, Ammar ibn Yasir, Ibn Mas'ud, Anas ibn Malik, Al-Bara ibn Azib, Abu Umama, Sahil ibn Sa'ad, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. Ibn Abi Shayba narrated in an authentic chain that Ibn Mas'ud wiped over socks. And likewise, Anas ibn Malik. Ibn Qudama stated in Al-Mughni that the fact that some Sahaba did it and no one objected made it an ijma'. Ibn Hazm related an ijma' of the Sahaba on it as well. Also, qiyas. Qiyas is proof in this, in permitting wiping over the socks. Ibn Taymiyyah said the only difference is the material, and that's not a recognized difference for fiqh purposes. It makes no substantive difference whether the material is leather or cotton. It's like wearing a black or white ihram, he said. There's no difference between khuff and a jawrab that would make the ruling different. If you can wipe over a khuff, you can wipe over a jawrab, because they all are covering for the foot with no substantive difference amongst them. Socks are included under khuff either linguistically or by qiyas. The next point, The need to wipe over the khuff is exactly like the need to wipe over socks, so they share the same ruling. And with that, we'll stop here. Jazakumullahu khair. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.